The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
At the Rabbit Room, we're always saying that art nourishes community and community nourishes art. Here's another way to say the same thing. We can all be allies in bringing good, beautiful, true things into the world. One way you can be an ally with the musicians and writers and artists whose work you care about is to leave a review. It helps other people find and benefit from the work that has meant something to you. And if you want to leave a review for this podcast, well, that'll be okay too. Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Chris Wall is a film producer in Nashville. He was at Big Idea Productions for 11 years, working on VeggieTales and 321 Penguins and other projects. He produced the Wingfeather Saga short film, in which he was the voice of Jenner Igby, and he's also the executive producer of the Slugs and Bugs television show. Chris Wall, thank you so much for being on the Habit Podcast today.
Glad to be here. Thanks for
this was not an easy day for you to make time. I don't know what exact date this is going to air, but today, the day we're recording, is the release date for the Slugs and Bugs television show.
It is. First time for families to get to see the whole thing, and it's been fun. I've gotten texts already from friends and family with photos of their kids watching the show.
Oh, that's great.
It's pretty great.
Okay, so you are the producer of the Slugs and Bugs show.
Yep.
You're going to have to help me out here because I'm not in that business. Tell me what a television and film producer does, and this may be a complicated answer, but...
No, I can simplify it. So we have to go to sports analogy.
Okay, good.
Can we work this? Okay, so a producer is a lot like a coach. Okay, so if we use football as that template, then it's about organizing the resources to best accomplish whatever goal that is.
Okay.
So in this case, it's a creative goal. And the nuance of that relationship to the talent, right? So the quarterback being possibly the director, if you were to go that far with this analogy, and then the different players being key positions, your talent, your cinematographers, your editors, all those talent pieces. The producer is the one in charge of deciding which talent is the right ones to have for this project.
Okay.
So I had my family ask me, hey, did you have so-and-so from VeggieTales? You know, and there were some elements where there were talent that aligned perfectly, like Kurt Heineke, composer, to bring in musically on Slugs and Bugs, because they were very similar. With Wingfeather, very different kind of thing. And so a lot of that talent pool stayed on that project, didn't cross to Slugs and Bugs, right? So it's just a different kind of thing. Producing between film, television, and theater is also very different. So in television, and there's a funny thing that occurred some years ago where there's always someone who pitches the idea, right? Hey, what if we did a thing about a thing?
Yeah.
that person is the one who then is kind of responsible creatively to make sure that whoever buys that, whether that's a network or a studio, gets that, right?
Okay.
So they get, I got a thing with the Tom Cruise doing a thing with a helicopter, right?
Okay.
Great, we want that. Okay. Somebody's responsible creatively. Now, there's other people that are responsible, in fiduciary ways. There's other people that are responsible in marketing ways, blah, blah, blah. But one person's responsible creatively. The producer sits in that role,
Okay.
making sure that's what delivers. Now, they'll use a director in film. That's a significant role because that director is going to make so much of the voice of that thing. In television, the director is a lesser role, and that they're the ones who call the shots. It's going to be a wide shot, then a close shot. They describe how the thing's going to be shot. But the executive producer, whoever that creator, oversees all that to make sure it stays on target, that it becomes a thing. So networks got frustrated with this some years ago and coined a term showrunner.
Yeah.
You may have heard that.
Yep.
And that is someone who runs the creative top to bottom for a whole series of television.
Okay.
And so that's my role. So
Okay. You're the showrunner
I'm
for
the
Slugs and
showrunner.
Bugs.
So I got pitched the idea, what if Randall did a TV show with Slugs and Bugs? And it was, well, maybe we could just have him with some kids singing some songs and it'd be a little of that, right?
Yeah.
And then I pitched back, well, what if it was a character-driven show? We make a world, blah, 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 populated with characters, Randall's the host, da-da-da. And I pitched that back. The network, basically, if you will, bought that and like, yes, we want that.
Okay.
Now it's my job to find the writers that we need for that, to find the cast we need, to build the characters, right? All that sort of thing. So anyways, long explanation, but that's producer does shift a little bit. Some are more, and then the title is executive producer, but there's a lot of executive producers. There's executive producers who are the money people, who kind of organize the deals, right?
Yeah.
And there's executive producers who are the creative. And so I fall into that bucket.
Gotcha. Okay. And is there somebody whose title for this show is executive producer?
Correct, Brock Starnes. So we
Okay.
both are executive producers.
Okay.
I often introduce myself as producer because it's what people understand because I'm the boots on the ground, making the thing. And Brock is the kind of business side, if you will, closing the deals, doing the
Gotcha.
contracts with all the talent. I, go find the talent. He does the deals, and then off we go.
Okay. All right. Okay. So you said somebody pitched the idea of a Slugs and Bugs TV show to you,
Yeah.
but they didn't pitch the idea of what the show is.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any? Can you even answer this question? How did you get to? I hear this music that Randall has been making for 10 or 12 years now, and I think that could be a narrative, a world.
Yeah, and so let me go back to 2000, I think it was 5 or 6. Kurt Heineke, who was doing music for us at Veggies, came back from Ryman, Behold the Lamb of God, having played with Andrew, and Andrew handed him the Andrew Peterson, the Slugs and Bugs and Lullabies very first CD. And he brought it to the office. Hey, Chris, there's this really fun project. Listen to it. I have a strong aversion to kids' music projects, so I did not open it. I turned and handed it to my sweet wife and said, hey, babe, look, a Christian kid CD. And she went, these are terrible. Called me the next day in the van and said, honey, did you listen to this at all? I said, I didn't even open it. She's like, it's great. We love it. You need to listen to it. And I was like, really? So I went home, listened to it, and was delighted. And it reminded me of the Smothers Brothers. The relationship that Andrew and Randall had, this kind of straight man, funny man, but just this warm camaraderie. There's just something in there. And so I actually ended up inviting the two of them to write some silly songs with Larry for Veggies.
Okay, so that's how they. That's how
I first met Andrew, first met Randall.
Okay.
Was through silly songs, right? And it was.
I knew they'd done some
delightful.
silly songs. I knew you were at VeggieTales, but I didn't realize that's how all that. happened.
And then of course Randall has gone on with it. But for me, that was the core. Was there's something here. In how these songs came to life. There's a story between Andrew and Randall. There's a story between some of the characters that are referenced in different parts of it. There's something. And so the New Zealand series, Flight of the Conchords, it does a lot of that, right?
Yeah, right.
Basically, so definitely a nod to
wow.
what they were doing about where did the Tiger song come from? In Slugs. Where did Tractor, which is the first one we did, where did that come from? Well, that was fun to think of of course, Andrew would have a tractor that he's excited about, and think about how that song could unfold and let that moment, which is in the CDs, it's a very funny turn where Randall's singing a song and then Andrew kind of takes it a different direction and it's very silly. Let that unfold right for the audience. So that was an easy one. And then each song was kind of that way. Now, some are more thematic, right, where they don't have a story narrative inside. And so then it's thinking about how applicable is that song? And so I kind of defined one of two ways for our writers that we would get to a song. One is we would just go into a song cold. That we walk in the workshop, Randall's been working on something out of a scripture or a life experience, and boom, we hit a song. And then the rest of that episode, we're going to just explore the thematics of that song. Others, we would have an adventure, some experience the characters go into, and then the song kind of comes out of that. And so either we're expressing the truth or challenging it by hearing it first, or we're finding it and kind of summing up, if you will. And anyways, once built, it was just a matter of kind of figuring it out. But then, I mean, the next stop in that is obviously, okay, well, who are the characters that populate it? When you build out a cast, of course, you have just different characteristics you're looking for to identify with your audience. And so you kind of, it's a little just mechanical, right?
Yeah.
You want this type of character who's fun-loving, and this type who loves to build, this one who loves to maybe create, this one who loves to read, and like we knew the facets we wanted and had built out the workshop to accommodate those spaces, that we wanted to encourage.
I hadn't thought about that. The geography of the workshop has to.
Absolutely, yeah. It actually started. That was the very beginning. Was we started with the workshop. I knew what I wanted to see for areas that we wanted for the kids to be able to explore and our cast to be in part of, and sent out to this wonderful concept artist who just brought that to life. And largely, what you see on screen is this very early, beautiful concept drawing that she created, Tessa, and then it's just figuring out, okay, how do the characters live in that space? It's interesting because I think the different expressions of that are from my years and years of experience in the Rabbit Room and Hutchmoot. So I remember watching the Hutchmoot the first time, and Pete had invited me, right, to talk about film stuff. And I walked in and I was like, oh, this isn't just writers talking about books or musicians talking about songs they were working on, but it was all these other very specific expressions of creativity. And I didn't think I fit in that crowd. And found that I did, that in this very kind of, I don't know, it feels like roughshod medium of film and television, I had a thing to offer, right? And so largely creating the show was thinking about like, well, could I model the halls of Hutchmoot, and that there'd be somebody who really loves to paint, and we got to have somebody who loves to bake and cook and make great food, and So I hope that when folks in the Rabbit Room community see it, that they can pick up on that
That's interesting.
expression. And of course, we have a library, and the characters loving to read, and maybe even thinking about writing.
Yeah.
Episode 3 is on two characters are thinking about writing a story. Yeah, of course they are. So there a lot of that alignment is there, where other kid shows may align for different things, right?
Yeah.
About the kid who's into construction stuff. It's a little more broad strokes.
Yeah.
I'm an engineer. I'm an astronaut. I'm a doctor.
Yeah.
Ours is much more in this space of
That's interesting.
creativity.
Yeah. Doug the Slug is a reader of the Russians, the Russian novelists.
Yes.
Where'd that idea come from?
Yeah, so we wanted Doug to be the reader for sure,
Yeah.
and then we'd cast Doug and Sparky as a little bit older. So they're maybe in their 20s, let's say.
Okay.
Right. It's just character-wise, that we wanted Maggie and Morty to be the kids.
Okay.
So that kids watching the show are like, I'm like Maggie or Morty, right?
Okay.
Identify with them. And Doug and Sparky are older, and they've had some. So honestly, it's a very similar line to Bob and Larry, that we had done with Veggie. That we had kind of targeted them as 20s-ish, that they've had some experience, but are not too far removed from high school, and that. And so, in building him out, one of my favorite tweaks was that he knows everybody. That anybody that walks in the workshop, hey Randall, what's up? Oh, Doug, how you been? I haven't seen you since Cancun. Like they have this Cancun, you what? And there's these crazy stories. His story about how he knows Ben Shive was an Elvis thing in Vegas. Like what?
Yeah.
And then of course he's well read, and he happens to have an affinity for. I don't remember where that joke actually. I wish I could attribute which writer that came from or where those sourced. It gets to be, in the development of a show, you start with a concept. We're going to do a show about collaboration. So thematic, and we think it'd be fun to have Ben Shive as a guest, because he's a great collaborator with Randall. Okay, great. So there's your cast. And then, oh man, it'd be awesome to have one of the singers that he has so many great singers that join. What about Nikki Connolly? Okay, great. We'll have Nikki join. So once that's said, then it's like, well, what's the story around that? What do I want to frame that with? What's our A plot? What's our B plot? And so we break the story in our writer's room in development. And that ultimately falls to my shoulders to then say, here's the outline of what's going to happen in this episode. We're going to do this, 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 and then off to one of the writers to flesh that out. Yeah. And so in the middle of all that, it's hard to know who had... Somebody asked me about a joke that somebody made, and I'm like, I don't remember who... I'd have to go deep dive to figure out who actually wrote. Some of these are pretty clear. I know exactly. Oh, that was definitely Micah, or was definitely. Yeah.
Well, somebody asked me if Doug the Slug's Russian literature thing was a nod to that other Doug McKelvey and his Russian.
No, in fact, it was just ahead of him, and it may have actually been from Randall. But I know that one was set in before Doug joined. So Doug was late. So. Love Doug McKelvey. And we were in kind of a darkest hour of just needing to finalize these scripts and get them locked in. And frankly, finding the right tone for a show like ours is difficult. And it's not unlike the experience I had in creating VeggieTales, where you have a particular voice that is entertainment first with strong, spiritual teaching underneath, right? And Rhema insight. We really worked for what we in the veggie world called the nugget of truth, right? What are we teaching? What is a child walking with? It's that little nugget they're going to leave with. And you could find writers that could write really interesting spiritual insight things, but it'd just be boring, right? It's just it's saccharine sweet, right? And just it's not our thing. Or it's really funny, it's punchy, it's some of the best writing you'll get, but all the spiritual references feel tacked on. And what we want is this authentic expression that, like you and I, we are in our families' lives, we are in the culture we live in, and we enjoy having fun and can make... it's like following Dr. Moore on Insta or Twitter, right? He's the perfect... he can speak about the deepest theology and then just talk about how much he loves the latest Star Wars or whatever. It's this fluidity that's very casual. And that's what we wanted in the show. So in the writers, that was challenging, finding the right people. And we got... Marshall was one of our writers who brought it home, as well as Drew. But... or Tori rather, and Micah. But one of the challenges there is getting a particular flavor that feels for me like the Rabbit Room. It just is the rooting that so many of us are in, and could weigh some of that in. I had forgotten that Doug McKelvey was a screenwriter. One of the many talents that this guy has, and I know he's very funny. If you don't follow him on Facebook or Insta, you need to, because he's very funny. And I was like, we need to call Doug in. And he came along, and he and I just... one of the other things in a writer's room is like any musicians, you've got to connect. It doesn't matter how talented that other person is. If you don't have a rapport and an ability to quickly work and laugh at the same things, it's a tough road. And I've had many writers over the years that I've hired that great writers, but we just there wasn't a thing. We couldn't get anything moving with the rest of the team. And so it's not a credit issue for them. It's more of a... does it work in the room? Right. And with Doug, it was amazing. And he and I, my face was pained every day going home, just laughing so much, because he and I just, same type of comedy and same type of humor, Yeah.
And so how much were you writing in the show? Were you...
I don't call myself a screenwriter. So on that note, essentially most executive producers, showrunners are screenwriters. There are quite a few that are not, though, who are storytellers. But screenwriting is a very particular craft, right? That it's structural. And dialogue has to be right there as you're driving the narrative spine. And so for the structure parts, that's my wheelhouse, which is interesting. So with Doug, he's great with words. He's really funny. His narrative spine, he's like, I'm trusting you, Chris. You have a better sense of what we're building here. And so that's how that partnership worked out. There are some lines of dialogue that I would write, but not many. I'm not a great
But you were
writer.
providing a structure to which the other writers were writing a skeleton.
So usually a 3 to 6 page outline. That maps through, and it would have snippets of dialogue here and there if I knew exactly how I wanted the characters to engage on a subject or have an exchange, but largely leaving that to these great writers to come back and give us those things.
Yeah. So how do you you do your job helping Randall create this thing without hijacking? I mean, where it's still Randall's thing.
Yeah, same thing. And for Andrew with Wingfeather, it was the same process where sometimes what people can do is you can just go option to work in someone's playground, right? So I could say, Andrew, I'd like to option Wingfeather Saga. I'm going to go make something out of that, right? And his creative influence and control would be lesser, right?
Okay.
With Randall, could have done exactly the same. You know, hey, Slugs and Bugs, I'm going to do this, and you just show up and speak these lines when I tell you to, right? It was my intention in both cases that I wanted to protect the voice and DNA of what they had done and to have them as close as possible as it would work, right? And for both guys, it was a different experience. Andrew was probably a little further away because I kind of got it and was able to speak his voice. A similar thing happened for me with VeggieTales, which is interesting that you say that. Early on, I just kind of got Veggie, like, as a college fan. I was one of the kids who got one of those early VHS cassettes, you know, and played it and was like, what is this? This is amazing, you know. It was the Dave and the Giant Pickle, you know, and Dave shows up with a pizza for his brothers, and Jimmy leans out the tent, you know, and says, cheese in the crust, that's tremendous. And I said, this is my show, right, you know. And myself and Phil Vischer, you know, who's been a part of Hutchmoot in the past, just had a connection. He's like, oh, you get it. Like, you understand the DNA, and I'm just here to serve that DNA, right? Same way for Andrew and for Randall. I'm here to serve the DNA. Now, in the case of Randall, I would say it was a more challenging because it was way thinner, like narratively.
Sure.
There was a lot more to create. So there was a lot of me creating something. What do you think, Randall? You know, and him having to work through it, you know, and I don't like that. I don't know why. Okay, we got to figure out why, because we can't stop here. We got to figure out the next thing, you know, and so it's hard work. I'll be honest, and it's you're deep in the trenches of how would this character respond to this type of thing, you know, and would they make this kind of joke or not, you know, and so it was rolled up our sleeves a lot more than even on Wingfeather. Wingfeather, you have 5 novels to pull from that like tell you like this is what the world is, you know.
Yeah.
So it's really just piecing together through all that, you know. This was listening to a lot of CDs and then just deciding, you know. And like so, Morty Raccoon, let's say, right? So this had been a character that had shown up in the episode or in the CDs, but was played by an adult male, right? And not a character yet. A funny voice, not a character yet. So not wanting to break that, but also like making our character out of that. Those are the kind of things we had to work through. You know?
Interesting. Does Morty appear in the TV show at all, or is it just the two little raccoons?
Yeah. So Chauncey, who is the head of the Sowers,
right,
does not appear yet, not in season 1.
Okay.
We were kind of choosing our cast and knew we needed Randall to play the adult. Responsible adult in the room. So Chauncey was kind of redundant in that. Even though he's a raccoon, we didn't need another adult in the cast. And then we had, of course, Artie, Sparky, and Doug. And so then it was, we need 2 kids, you know.
Wait, so Morty is the boy raccoon?
The boy raccoon.
Oh, okay. I get Morty and I was getting Chauncey and Morty mixed up.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, so one thing, when I'm teaching writing, a lot of times I'm trying to get people out of formulaic ways of thinking, but in screenwriting there are some formulas that you just don't have any choice but to conform to. Talk to me about that. Talk to me about that a little bit.
There was a lot of tension in creating the show in the writing team. A lot of them had written for some great, you know, other properties, and the ruts of those grooves of how you make kids entertainment that is 22 minutes in length that targets this preschool audience is a deep rut. And I was intentional about wanting to break that, about saying, I know that we normally wouldn't talk about this subject in this way with preschoolers, but here we're going to.
Okay.
And it was very intentional. So there were structural references to other shows. We knew, you know, structurally, in the first 5 minutes this happens. You do all those important pieces, but then being willing to say, I realize we shouldn't do this for preschool, but we're going to do this because it's the kind of show we want to create, which is more about attending to families, right? So I think it's important that you know those rules, right? Know the structure and the formats and all the things, so that when you go to begin to pound against them and say, we're going to go a different way, you will. And it comes out of, we're a homeschool family, 6 kids, and we are very much a literature-based education. And early on, we were told, one of the things that's challenging about having multiple ages in the kids, and you're trying to teach the older kid, some, deeper concept in literature while the youngers are sitting around, is the youngers are lost, right? And we were encouraged, no, keep reading. Read to the older ones, and the little ones will get the crumbs off the table.
Yeah.
And they won't get it all, but they'll begin to develop a taste for these more mature subjects. And honestly, that's what I carried into the show, was we know that some phrases and ways that characters talk wouldn't be what you'd normally do on a kid's show. But we're going to go for this. And we're not going to take some of the easy routes either. I'm very aligned with Sally Lloyd-Jones, where she talks about the respect that we show children and the kind of things that we offer them.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that other shows are disrespectful, but in our case, we wanted to be respectful to, I'm going to talk to you as an adult about something that you need to know about. And I'm not going to gaga goo goo that or sing-songy, make it silly. I'm going to make it in a way that will be a little robust, and you may not get all of it, but you'll get some of it. And I'll try to do it packaged in a way that is still entertaining and has a little sugar on it, so it's not too difficult, but we're not going to shy from that. So like when we talked about adoption, we could have just played the note of adoption's great. It's so wonderful. But I wanted the counter note of and complicated.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Actually, in Randall's episode of The Habit, he taled about this very topic of adoption and the way that song worked itself out.
And episode after episode. And we'd come back with a screenplay come in, from one of our writers, and Randall and I would have read it, and we'd meet and talk, and both have the same. Like, that's nice what they're saying about this subject, but it's too off the top. I want to go deeper on creativity. It is not going to be, if you create something that's really great, you'll win the prize at the local show. Winning a prize has nothing to do with whether that bit of creative work was good or bad. And let's get away from the winner script on that. It's very hard in a preschool kids show, where you're trying to do a thin line straight through. And so some of these got really tough, I'll be honest. And I hope we land.
What do you mean? What does that phrase mean, a thin line straight through?
Well, it's just like, creativity. Yeah, make that. Oh, it's wonderful. Celebrate. And you won, and ta-da!
Yeah.
Like, there's no narrative twists in there that are interesting. It's just right through, And in ours, we wanted some narrative twists where a character is I'm going to make something, it's going to be great, and it was terrible.
Yeah.
Okay, now what?
Yeah. I get. When I was asking you about formulas.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed, because I've seen 2 episodes of the show, because the whole season just came out this morning, and I didn't have a chance to watch it. But the 2 episodes I've seen. It was very clear that you were exploring. I mean, I saw the episode on collaboration, which I thought was really interesting to be talking about collaboration for preschoolers, and also very relevant as it turned out. And so it was obvious from what you've been saying also that you were pushing against the conventions of what people talk about, the way they talk about it, and yet it's still a 22. There's certain conventions that you are not breaking. 22-minute. I assume these are 22 minutes long, right?
Roughly.
Yeah, and that's what was interesting to me, that you were sort of accepting certain limitations and conventions, and then within those conventions, doing something unconventional.
Yeah. So narrative breaks. So act breaks where you build up to and then have the short segments, which, I really wanted that. I love the kind of breakaway in a variety show style thing where a character goes and does a silly thing for a few minutes. It's just like a commercial break almost, and so that was one of the elements we wanted. In the show, there is a pressure to start a show. So some people talk about us like Mr. Rogers, and I think because dear Randall has such a genteel personality, you can't not help but draw that.
Right.
Mr. Rogers had a very predictable pattern about how the show would unfold, and I wanted to push back against that. And every episode, as many as possible, start in different places, in different moments, where we join something that's already happening, right? That we're not at the beginning of something about to, like we're in the middle, collaboration, they're in the middle of already writing and working on something, right?
Yeah.
And then Morty and Sparky are in the middle of their imaginary play with their vines swinging around the workshop. It's not that they had the idea, they're going to go do it. We're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And we don't start at the same place. we're not at the door every time like a Mr. Rogers.
Okay.
So some of those breakups are against norm. In preschool shows, you often want a pattern.
Yeah.
Because the kids really like patterns,
Yeah.
and so the countertops in VeggieTales is a patterning that, and good or bad, I don't know if we'll,
Yeah.
but I wanted to just start different ways. That it was surprising when you press play on an episode, we don't know where we're going to be,
Yeah. Did people on the team push back against you on that?
Oh yeah. Particularly, my network writers, people who'd written for television, they were both pushback and then also like, well, this is kind of fun.
Yeah,
like,
right.
To have some of those constraints off. And I think we're in that space now where, thanks to the rise of all the streaming platforms, we don't have the same boundaries. One of the boundaries that's been around for years and years and years is adjacency. And so adjacency is if I have a television show that's playing to a 6-year-old girl who's sitting on the couch watching this, the program that comes before and after that show has to keep her in the seat. If I go to a boy program, she will leave the room, and the boy may come in but may not because he was already told not to be there. So gender is a really big one there. Age demographic really drives adjacency in traditional television and kind of network where it's being fed down a pipe. That all got thrown out the moment we started streaming, right? Now the child chooses where they want to go. Well, now you have the freedom to have dual genders, right? And so I wanted to make sure we had a show that had boys and girls present, right, with their different personalities. I want to make sure we had not only the builder kind of kid who's being attended to by our show, but also the more creative kid who wants to write and paint be attended to. That is some of the limitations of the adjacency of networks didn't allow for that in the past. Now they do. So in that open landscape, and we joked a second ago about the runtime, is it 22 minutes ish?
Yeah.
That's not the same anymore, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you watch any series on Netflix or Amazon or other place, they're around a certain hour, maybe. And we had the same freedom where we could really explore the length. And then, how we're going to think about who's sitting on the couch. And in our case, we always thought about families sitting together. Incidentally, and talking to colleagues at Netflix, it's a thing they're desperate to get done. And so they're really working hard to get more family programming.
Really?
Because what they're seeing in all their data, same thing, is families, the mom's watching on the TV, the dad's upstairs on the iPad, and the kid's on his iPhone. And they're all watching separate streams of things, but they're not getting families watching together. And they know that's a problem because it actually doesn't build a connection and an affinity. And we knew on our show, I want to make sure that we're putting things in here that make mom, dad, and even older siblings want to sit down and watch the show. And it's funny because this comes back to Phil and Mike when they were creating VeggieTales. They had done a puppet show on their college campus. And as college kids are wont to do, were aware that when they were entertaining the kids, there were adults present or other friends of theirs in college. So they're going to throw things into this little kids puppet show to get those people to pay attention, right?
Yeah.
And to not be alienated either, right? None of the kind of sing-songy, more irritating part of preschool entertainment. That's the same thing we had. That we were just very aware that I have moms, dads, and older siblings, and I want to make sure we keep them in.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, as a grown person, I found that show tremendously entertaining.
Yay.
It's so fun. It's a funny show.
Which I would say, too, is the music. I just have to put a footnote in there because musically in these kind of shows, you can do really simple stuff, kind of plinkety-plinkety.
Yeah.
We wanted robust things, right? And so we got to pull together some of the great Nashville players.
Yeah.
We did a session down the street with Stuart Duncan. And Kurt Heineke directed that session. He came out of it like, I've never directed anything like that in my life,
Yeah.
And Jeff came in and
Jeff Taylor.
Jeff Taylor. And of course, Buddy had already been on the show.
Buddy Green.
And it was just I've got a little footage of that I look forward to sharing someday that, they are not traditional kids musicians, but we treated them, and said, here's your people.
Yeah. That's so much fun.
Yeah.
All right. I always end these conversations with this question.
Okay.
I'll adjust the question for you. I usually say, who are the writers that make you want to write? So let me just say, who are the people who make you want to create?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always kid stuff. One of my favorite movies of all time, Dennis the Menace.
Really?
Yeah. Anything John Hughes with his kids and family stuff. So when you think about Home Alone and that territory of just writing authentic people and families, like that's how my kids behave. That's how I behave, minus some of the harsh language. But those are like that kind of. It's often a writer-director kind of pairings, and so the Wes Andersons of the world, the Coen brothers, who the characters immediately come to life and are people that I've met. right? That is what I'm 100% drawn to. And I look for in both the story setting and characters that we want, and then the writers that I get to invite to the table. I want that kind of snap where when I read, I'm like, only so-and-so could say that. And you say it in such a way that's so authentic. Like, I believe it. I don't feel like it's written prose. I feel like you captured a moment in a family's life. You know, Phil had always talked about Veggies as making Sunday school and our church life as kids normal. So I could talk fluidly about what I experienced at church, and then go right into the hallway at school, and it's one dialogue and one conversation, and it's making what we experience in the Christian life normal. The everyday, the Deuteronomy passage. We're walking along the path, and I'm talking to you about a spiritual truth while we mow the yard and do this. That is what I love. And so when I see that in film, in whether it's a Western or a kid's show, I just love.
Wait, when you see what in a Western?
That kind of authentic, like it's clear that you are really in that town in the West in the moment, right? And so like the Coen recent one on Netflix, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, you know, just authentic moments of like, I've been there. Like I grew up on a farm, so it's, you know, close to me. But that kind of thing, that's what I really respond to. Because I think we then can align to, as audience and viewers can go, yeah, that's my experience. And you're expressing it now artistically, but in a way that I identify and can maybe find a way to connect to the truth even more strongly, you know, about that expressed. So
Are there books that make you want to go make something?
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, for me, I'm a fantasy guy. You know, right now, this may not work, Jonathan Rogers, but I'm attempting The Lord of the Rings as a read aloud with my kids.
Okay,
that's a lot of reading.
That really is, and a lot of strange words.
We're halfway through fellowship, and we'll see if I can finish it. But I thought it'd be a good try. I
think I might have made it through the fellowship, but I don't think I made it past that.
I don't know if I will.
Yeah,
it's tough.
Well, great. Well, Chris Wall, thank you so much for being here. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Jonathan.
And actually, I've learned a ton about how TV works.
Cool. Great.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for having me.
The Rabbit Room has partnered with Lipscomb University to make this podcast possible. Lipscomb has graciously given us access to their recording studio and the Center for Entertainment and Arts building. We're so grateful for their sponsorship, their encouragement, and the good work they do in Nashville. Special shout out as well to the Arcadian Wild for allowing us to use their delightful song Finch in the Pantry as part of this podcast. Check out their album of the same name for more excellent music.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
This podcast was produced by The Rabbit Room, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to fostering Christ-centered community and spiritual formation through music, story, and art. All our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.